Hi guys. Okay, while I curl my hair, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of what happened on my true crime podcast this week. It's called Storytime Slayer. Check it out. Okay, this week I did an episode about a lady named Sharon Nelson. Oh my gosh, talk about a seductress. Okay. So Sharon Nelson was born in 1945, and she'd been part of a really conservative Seventh-day Adventist family. And she got married pretty young to a pastor. His name was Mike Fuller. And she didn't really want to marry him, but her parents were super strict and devout Seventh-day Adventists. And they were like, oh my gosh, he's a minister. He's going places. You have to marry him. So she does marry him, but it's not like the best marriage. Her and Mike both have their moments of infidelity. And in fact, when Sharon gets pregnant with her first kid, it's not even Mike's baby. Okay. Her daughter's name was Rochelle, her oldest daughter, and she had Rochelle by somebody else, but Mike claimed the baby and took care of the baby. Plus, like, he's a minister. That's his wife. This is in the times where it's very, very frowned upon to be having kids out of wedlock because of affairs, especially when you're a Seventh-day Adventist. So Mike takes care of the baby and everything's fine, right? And to get away from their crazy, crazy past, after they had their second daughter, Sharon and her husband, Mike, move to Colorado to start over. They lived in North Carolina. They moved to Colorado. So while they're in Colorado, they've been married for a while, guys. Like, I'm just off the top of my head, I want to say like a decade. But while they were in Colorado, Sharon decided, you know what? I need me a new man. So she starts prowling for a new man. And to find her new man, what she did was she actually searched the church records to see like what kind of jobs everybody had, what their assets were, what they contributed to the church, things like that. And that's how she found Perry Nelson. Okay, so Perry Nelson was an optometrist who too had been married for a pretty significant amount of time to a woman, and he had a daughter named Lori. Well, Sharon really, listen, guys, the lady knows how to put the moves down, okay? So at a dinner party at Perry and his wife's house, Sharon starts flirting pretty heavily with Perry. And you know what? Perry was just kind of happy to have the attention, I think, because apparently him and his wife were kind of in a rough spot anyway. And she wasn't super, like, sexual, I guess. So he I think he liked the attention. Woo-hoo. Before long, Sharon and Perry start a full-on affair. So Perry is an optometrist, meaning he's an eye doctor. He's got a private practice. And he even brings Sharon on to work with him as a secondary assistant. He already had one assistant in the office, but he hired her as a second one. And she wasn't really like office assistant material. He just hired her so that'd be easier for them to like sneak off and have little rendezvous and flirt in the office and stuff like that. So she goes to work for him. The affair is super, super hot and heavy. A lot of people in town start to catch on because they live in a really small town. A lot of members of the church start to catch on. And in fact, they even tried people in the community to talk to Mike and tell him that Sharon was having an affair with her now boss, Perry. And he was furious that the people would even suggest his wife was having an affair. He's like, come on. I know she's hot. I know she's flirty. I know she dresses totally scandalous. Okay. Super short shorts, really tight clothes, always a little one button too low. But she's for sure not having an affair. He brushes it off. Well, eventually Sharon and Perry, I'm having trouble here. Okay, eventually they just come out to their spouses and say, hey, we're having an affair and we actually want a divorce and we want to be together. Mike fights for Sharon. He does not want to let her go. He doesn't want to get divorced. Perry's wife is like, oh yeah, you cheating on me? Fine. That's fine. She's done with it anyway. She hadn't been sexual in a while. The relationship wasn't that great. She was over it. So she ends up moving to California with her and Perry's daughter, Lori, and Sharon her husband, Mike, he gets divorced, and he actually takes the girls. He won't let Sharon have them. She didn't really fight that hard anyway, but he gets custody of the girls, and they move so that they can have a fresh start away from like all the rumors and the scandal. Meanwhile, Sharon and Perry, they just move in together, guys. Like, they live in this small town. Their whole church finds out. It's a whole scandal. But yeah, they end up staying there, and they buy their own little starter home, and life goes on. Let's fast forward a little bit. A couple kids, and a couple years later, Sharon has managed to completely get Perry into all kinds of debt. Plus, nobody likes Sharon, okay? She dresses like a whore. She acts like a whore. She's annoying. She literally does cheat on Perry with other people's husbands and stuff. The whole town knows what kind of person she is. So they don't like her. As I said, she gets Perry into hundreds and thousands of dollars into debt. He loses a lot of his clientele. The business is slowly declining. Like, life is not good for Sharon and Perry. And in the middle of all this drama, Sharon decides, you know what? I'm going to go prowling for another man. Okay, so she does that. And she ends up finding none other than Perry's best friend, Buzz. Yeah, okay. She leaves him for his best friend. And she asks Perry for a divorce. They'd only been married for about like, oh gosh, I can't even remember, 4 years, something like that. So Sharon packs up. She goes and lives with Buzz. She asks Perry for a divorce. And just like Mike, Perry does not want to let Sharon go. So he keeps her, and he won't grant her divorce until she gets pregnant by Buzz. And as soon as she got pregnant by Buzz, Perry was like, oh, hell no, I'm for real done with you. I'm not taking care of nobody else's baby. And at that point, you would have thought Sharon would be happy because she'd wanted the divorce from Perry. She wanted to be with Buzz. But when she got pregnant, Buzz kicked her out. So Perry tells Sharon, I will take you back, but you have to get an abortion. I'll pay for it. So at 5 months pregnant, she gets an abortion, and she goes back to Perry, you guys. Okay, so Perry's really like pleased that Sharon came back with him. They're living happily ever after, he thinks. And it's really sad. Because of the relationship that Perry maintained with Sharon and her reputation in town declining year after year, Perry literally was like a totally different person. He got kicked out of Seventh-day Adventist Church for his affair with Sharon, and her whole attitude and behavior. He started cussing. He drank a lot. He even got drink at work sometimes. So like, his life is rapidly declining because of Sharon, yet he can't seem to part with her. So after Sharon rekindles with Perry and she goes back home, you know, she had the abortion, and her and Perry, la-di-da-da-da, Sharon decides to start prowling for a new man, because that's what she needs. She needs a new man. Okay, and so this, ooh, that's a big piece. So this is how Sharon meets mountain man Gary Adams. And unlike all the other men that Sharon had sought after and hooked up with, Gary Adams was poor. Okay, he was a carpenter with a wife who was a waitress, and they lived down the hill from Sharon, and they just worked enough to like barely get by. You know what I mean? Those type of people. And he was not her type at all. And it's so funny because she like starts hitting on him, and they decide like, yeah, let's have a hot and heavy affair. Like, ooh, this is gonna be great. Except for every time they try to hook up, Gary couldn't even get hard. Like, he couldn't even have sex with her. And for some reason, they like really wanted this affair to work. So they just like kept meeting up and kept trying until finally, after several attempts, Gary's able to get hard, and they can actually have this lustual affair. During the affair, she's telling Gary things like, oh my gosh, Perry is so mean to me and the kids. He's abusive. He hits us. It's just lies, lies, lies. She makes up all these lies about Perry. And Gary is like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. So of course, Sharon eventually is like, Gary, can you please kill Perry for me? And Gary's like, oh my gosh, absolutely, babe, I got you. No problem. So they conspire, and they come up with, like, in my opinion, it was a pretty good plan. It was a pretty good plan. It's July 1983, and Perry actually has a convention in Colorado, which is about 4 hours away. He lives in Colorado. He has a convention in Denver, which is about 4 hours away from where they live. And they decided, okay, ready? Gary asked Perry if he could catch a ride with him to the convention because he wanted to meet up with somebody in the Denver area to buy a handgun. And Perry's like, oh my gosh, absolutely no problem. Mind you, Sharon and Perry are the only people who know that Gary is with Perry driving up there. Gary had told his wife he was going to poker night with the boys, and then he dropped his car off at like this local shop to get his brakes checked. And so that's where his vehicle is. And he then makes his way to Perry's house. I don't know how he gets there, but he gets there. And before he leaves with Perry, he calls a friend and he like does the math in his head. And he said, okay, I need you to pick me up around midnight at this, it's an underpass of a bridge in a very specific area. So he'd already planned where and what he was going to do to Perry, right? So he gets in the car. Him and Perry are driving to Perry's convention. My hair looks crazy. Him and Perry are driving to Perry's convention, and Perry either pulls over because he's tired, or Gary asks him to pull over so he can go to the bathroom. Reports are like really, really mashed up about that one. Regardless, whatever. He pulls over. It's close to midnight. And when they get out of the car, Gary goes down by the water and picks up like one of the bigger rocks, but not so big that it was hard to carry. And he goes up behind Perry and he bashes him in the head. And Gary's dumbass thinks that Perry's just gonna like fall over and pass out immediately, right? Well, he doesn't. The two men start fighting, and they are fighting right next to a river. And sure enough, they actually get in the river and are continuing to fight. And so Gary starts holding Perry's head underwater, thinking that maybe he can like drown him. Well, Perry gets swept up in the current and just washes down the river. Gary has no idea if he killed him or not. He's like, Gary's original plan was that he was going to have Perry pull over, he was going to drown him, and then he was going to put him into his car, buckle him up, and push his car off of a bridge to make it look like Perry had a car accident. Well, not knowing if Perry's dead or alive, he decides, you know what, screw it. I'm going to take the car and I'm going to go push it off a bridge to make it look like Perry had an accident. That way, if he does die and he washes up, it'll look like he just fell out of the car. Honestly, not a bad idea. So Gary goes to Perry's car, gets in it, gets something on the thing, on the gas, and once it got to going at about like 20 miles an hour, Gary jumps out of the car, okay? And the car goes floating down this big gushing river near Denver in Colorado. It's close to midnight, like he said. His friend's at the underpass. He picks him up. He drives him home. As far as his wife was concerned, he was just at a really late boys' night. Life goes on. Sharon and Gary actually get away with the murder of Perry. His car washes up. His body doesn't for at least a year. By time it does, it'd been so long in the water and the elements and stuff, there was no evidence corroborate anything other than a car wreck gone wrong. So she gets $400,000 in life insurance, and she gives Gary $50,000 for his part. However, all is not well. Like, Gary will not leave his wife, and she realizes that. So it's the spring of 1987, and in one last ditch effort, she talks Gary into moving away with her to Denver and getting married. They literally set a wedding date, get a rental house, go stay in a hotel the night before they're supposed to get married and move into their new property. But whenever Sharon wakes up, Gary was gone. He'd gone back to his wife again. And this time she stayed in Denver. She's like, screw it. I'm going to stay in Denver with my kids that I had with Perry, and I'm going to start my life over. So she starts going by the name Cher, and she starts browsing the single ads in the newspaper for a new man because she needs some money. So of course, she blew through that life insurance money so fast from Perry. So she's browsing through the singles ads and she meets this really nice guy. His name's Glenn Harrison. He was a retired military veteran and a firefighter. He'd been married for a really long time and was totally dumbfounded when his wife wanted a divorce after like 22 years of marriage. So this was his first attempt also at like getting back in the dating scene. And he was so taken aback to have someone so charismatic and funny, beautiful, sexy, like Sharon, who is now going by Cher, into him, that he really didn't read too much into it, how quickly things moved along. He invited her and her kids to come live with him. And things were like going really good. And then things got kind of weird. Him and Sharon broke up. She moved back out to her house, which is over 3 hours away, out in the woods, the one that her and Perry had together. She never sold it. She kept it. And he realizes, like, I love Cher. Glenn Harrison loved Cher. So he calls her in a last-ditch effort to get her to come visit him and just have, like, one more sexy night together. And he ends up talking to her coming back to be with him. And she is like, well, I'll be with you and I'll marry you, but I'm not moving back. So they do get married in a really quick jailhouse ceremony. Courthouse, nobody's in jail yet. Get married June 2nd of 1988, and by November 15th of 1988, Cher, who we all know, the only reason she didn't want to leave her house in the mountain is because her mountain man Gary lives at the end of the hill, and they're still having an affair. He won't leave Nancy, but he will knock boots with Cher any day. So she tells Gary on November 15th, like, dude, we got to get rid of Glenn and we have to kill him before the holidays because I don't want to deal with his mom, which is so selfish to me. Like, if you know you're going to kill somebody, you should at least like let their family have one more good holiday with them and just like make it the best. But no, she doesn't want to see Glenn's mom. So she's like, Gary, I need you to kill him and I need you to kill him by Thanksgiving. So November 18th, Gary makes the like a little over 3-hour drive to Glenn's house to kill him. You see, Glenn still lived at his house during the week and would go stay with Sharon on the weekends because they were still married. They were very much together, but she didn't want to move out to the city again and he couldn't leave his job. He loved his job. So he would just commute and stay at her house on the weekends and stay at his house during the week. So Gary gets there. It's November 18th, 1988. And Sharon had told him, okay, where to park. So he parks like a mile from Gary's. There's so many weird names. He parks a mile from Glenn's. We're talking about Glenn, Haley. So he parks a mile from Glenn's house and he walks there. And Sharon had told him, okay, Glenn's going to get home at like 9 o'clock. So he gets there at 8:30 and he waits for him. And he has an 18-inch pipe, but he also has a handgun just in case he can't overpower Glenn with the pipe. The idea is that he'll hit Glenn in the head with the pipe. He'll just miraculously pass out and he can stage an accident just like he did with Perry. However, when Glenn walks in the door at 8:30, 9 o'clock, when he walks in the door at 9 o'clock, he is met by Gary, and Gary and him get into a physical altercation and he cannot overpower Glenn. Gary cannot overpower Glenn. So he ends up in a physical altercation with him and he has to pull out his gun. He shoots him 2 times in the head. So now he can't make it look like an accident. He can't make it look like an accident. Instead, he decides he's going to make it look like some type of busted ass robbery. So Glenn's already dead. And what he does is he goes and he gets a change jar and he pours the change all around Glenn's body. And then he goes and gets a gas can from the garage, covers Glenn with a bunch of like dirty old clothes and laundry and stuff, blankets, something like that, fabric-y. And he coats the whole thing in gasoline. And because he needed time to get out of the house, he actually did something that was a little bit creative. He lit a cigarette and put it at the very end of a match case so that like as the cigarette burned, it would get closer to the matches and then hopefully catch on fire. Kaboom. So while his cigarette time lighter is going off, he escapes Glenn's house through a basement window and then makes it back to his truck. Sharon secured herself an alibi by being hours away at an old friend's house unexpectedly, staying up, watching movies, gossiping, la-di-da-da-da. And Glenn booked it back home. no one was none the wiser. But of course, Glenn was a firefighter. So he was like friends with the fire marshals, the investigators, and it was super, super, super suspicious. They were definitely not going to let this go by the wayside, especially when Glenn's friends didn't even like Sharon, and he worked with his friends. They were aware that she had a husband that had already died not that long ago. So they really, really do a deep dive into this case. However, they have no evidence. They got nothing. Everything's circumstantial, but they start pressing Sharon hard during this investigation of Glenn. It was nothing like Perry's. Everyone just kind of was suspicious, but kind of took what they could from Sharon at face value. They were not taking it at face value with Glenn. And the second time police talked to Sharon, she just cracks. She just spills. She didn't have to. She probably could have gotten away with it again, but she just couldn't take it anymore. So she tells police, okay, come with me, follow me in my car. I got my kids with me. We're going to go somewhere that we can sit and talk, and I'll tell you everything. So she drives to the local Pizza Hut. I say local, it was literally like a 30-minute drive. And I think she probably needed the drive so that she could talk to her daughter, Rochelle, who is her oldest daughter. At this point, Rochelle's like a young adult now. And kind of give her the lowdown on what's happening, what to do with her kids. The ones that her and Perry had together were still young, yada, yada, yada. So they get to the Pizza Hut, and she just, guys, she spilled it all. She told police everything. Not just about Glenn's murder. She went all the way back to the Perry murder. She gave her and Gary up for both murders. That is so crazy to me. Sharon and Gary are both charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. They both plead guilty. Gary didn't want to plead guilty at first, but for one, Sharon was going to testify against him. And then for 2, he had told Sally where he hid the gun that he used on the Glenn Harrison murder. And it was under the second step on his porch. And that was actually corroborated and found. So they had a lot of evidence against him. He ends up just giving it up, doesn't go to trial. He pleads guilty. And they are both sentenced to prison without the possibility of parole for 20 years. So Sharon isn't eligible till 2029 and Gary isn't eligible till 2030. Gary said that he did kill Perry for $50,000, but he killed Glenn as a labor of love. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. Gary maintains that he really did love Sharon a lot. He just couldn't leave his wife, Nancy, because he couldn't bear the thought of leaving the mother of his children alone with and all that. Like, toxic. Ooh, bad karma, right? So, yeah, that is it. That is a doozy for me, you guys. Like, that is so much. Anyway, there's so much more twists and turns, and I really dive into how good Sharon was at being a seductress and manipulative in the podcast episode. But anyway, guys, have a great day.